Two black twin brothers walked into a billionaire's lobby at 7 in the morning, soaking wet, a hole in the left shoe. Security reached for the phone. Then one of them placed something on the marble desk. A wallet, $14,000 inside. Every bill still there. The building stopped breathing. 61 floors up, a man who hadn't felt anything since his son died picked up that wallet, found the note hidden inside. And stung like something in him had finally given way. He looked at the twins across his desk. Homeless. Hadn't eaten in 2 days, could have vanished with every dollar. Didn't. What he said next text changed all three of their lives forever. The hand. That is where this story begins. Not with a building, not with a name, not with a number that will make your breath stop when you hear it. With a hand. A black hand, dry at the knuckles, cracked along the fold of the thumb from months of cold water and dish soap, and the particular violence that manual work does to skin that doesn't get lotion often enough. Holding a wallet, a black leather wallet, thick and heavy, the kind of weight that means something before you even open it. Rain on the back of that hand. A closed flower shop awning overhead. Nobody watching. That is the whole story, in a way. Everything else is just the distance between that moment and what the hand did next. Go back 2 hours. Go back 8 months. Go back 20 years if you want to understand how a hand gets to that corner at that hour, making that choice. The distance doesn't matter. The choice is the same, regardless of how far you travel to reach it. But start with the hand. The underpass at the south end of Brooklyn smelled like diesel and wet concrete. Bryce Okafor had stopped noticing this around month 2, the same way you stop noticing the sound of traffic if you live near enough to a highway. The smell became part of the air, the same way the air became part of breathing, and breathing became part of surviving. And surviving was the only item on the agenda that had not changed since the night their mother died. He opened his eyes at 4:47 in the morning, no alarm, no sound. Just the end of sleep arriving the way it always arrived now, not as rest concluding, but as the body deciding that stillness had used up its allotted time and movement was required again. He allowed himself 30 seconds horizontal. This was the rule he had made without announcing it to anyone. 30 seconds of lying still, of feeling the 3 layers of cardboard beneath his back, of listening to the rain tap the plastic tarp overhead in a rhythm that was almost but not quite regular. Then up. He sat up. The space was 8 feet wide and roughly 12 feet deep, carved into the shadow beneath a concrete pillar that had been holding up the overpass since 1987. Someone had spray-painted the year in red letters that had since faded to a color closer to rust. Bryce had read it so many times it had stopped being information and become something else, something closer to wallpaper. 1987, the year the pillar went up. The year that meant nothing and somehow meant everything about how long forgotten things could keep standing if nobody came along to knock them down. His side was on the left. Caleb's was on the right. Caleb's was already awake. He was sitting cross-legged on his cardboard with his back straight and a black composition notebook open across his knee, writing by the glow of a phone screen that read 9%. His handwriting was small and even. The notebook was a black compositions book, 50 cents from a bodega 2 months ago. Bryce had found it wedged between a rack of phone cases and a display of scratch-off lottery tickets and brought it back without being asked. That was how it worked between them. Bryce knew what Caleb needed before Caleb said it. It wasn't a gift. It was just what happened when 2 people were all each other had for long enough. Caleb did not look up. "I'm heading to Dots," Bryce said. Low voice, not a whisper. Just quiet in the way you get quiet when you've spent enough times in spaces where sound bounces wrong. Back by 9. Caleb nodded once. That was the whole conversation. That was enough. Bryce laced his shoes. Gray Nikes, found in a donation bin outside a Baptist church on Atlantic Avenue 6 weeks earlier. Size 10.5, which was a half size too big. He had stuffed the left toe with folded newspaper to compensate for the fit and also to cover the hole that had opened near the toe last week. On mornings like this one, rain since midnight, sidewalks still slick and black, the left foot would be wet before he reached the end of the block. He pulled the lace tight anyway. He stood up, rolled his shoulders once, and looked at his brother in the paled blue light of the screen. Caleb had the notebook pressed close now, pen moving in small deliberate strokes, completely absorbed in whatever lived on those pages that Bryce had never read and Caleb had never explained. and neither of them had ever discussed, because some things between brothers exist in a language that doesn't require translation. He picked up the plastic grocery bag by the entrance. Inside it, a clean rag, a small bottle of dish soap he'd been rationing for 3 weeks, and a folded piece of paper with Dot Freeman's phone number on it. He had never used the number. He had never been late. The paper was there anyway, because Gloria Okafor had raised a boy who understood the difference between being reliable and simply happening to show up. He stepped out from under the overpass and into the rain. Brooklyn at 4:47 in the morning was its own specific world. Not the Brooklyn any photographed or wrote about or moved to for the coffee shops and the brownstones and the farmers markets on Saturday mornings. This was the Brooklyn of loading dock workers finishing overnight shifts. The woman in the long coat, walking a small dog that moved like it resented being outside. The bodega on the corner that never closed, yellow light falling through its open door onto the wet sidewalk in a rectangle that looked almost warm. Bryce walked his route. He had memorized it the way you memorize things you do in the dark, not by thinking but by repetition, until the body knew it without the mind's help. Down the concrete steps, across Tillery, past the parking garage that smelled like motor oil and something chemical underneath. Through the alley behind the French restaurant corner, the one with the garbage bins lined up neatly by the kitchen door. He checked beside the bins. Sometimes the kitchen staff left day-old bread in a bag there. Once it had been half a baguette and a sealed container of butter that wasn't even expired, and Caleb had eaten 3 pieces of bread that morning with an expression Bryce hadn't seen his brother's face in months. The expression of someone eating something that tasted like more than just food. The bag wasn't there this morning. He kept walking, past the dry cleaner with the cracked front window that showed no signs of ever being fixed. Past the bus stop where a man in an orange safety vest was sleeping upright on the bench with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to wherever sleep was available. Past the corner where a produce delivery truck sat idling, the driver inside eating from a paper bag, a radio, playing something Bryce could feel in the bass frequencies through the soles shoe. He was thinking about Caleb's phone, 9%. Not enough for a full day. The library had outlets, but the library didn't open until 9, which was after the shift at Dodd's ended. Caleb would need to wait, or use the outlet near the fountain at Cadman Plaza, which worked about half the time depending on factors Bryce had never been able to identify. 9% was not a full day. 9% was a problem he needed to solve before 10 in the morning, or Caleb would be cut off from the thing that kept his mind quiet. And when Caleb's mind wasn't quiet, the silence came off him like weather. He was still thinking about this when he saw it. At the edge of the curve, half tucked against the grate of a storm drain, the way objects ended up in that specific position when they fell from a pocket at exactly the wrong angle. The rain had darkened the leather but hadn't soaked through. It was thick, well made. Heavy in the way that an object is heavy before you touch it, when the weight comes across the distance between you and the thing and lands somewhere in your chest before your hand has reached it. Bryce stopped walking. He looked at it. He looked up and down the block, empty in both directions. A taxi rolled through the intersection half a block south, but didn't slow. The city was doing what the city did at 4:51 in the morning, which was nothing. Nobody watching, nobody coming. He crouched down and picked it up. Black leather. Soft in the hand, not new. Broken in, worn at the fold in a way that meant someone had opened and closed it hundreds of times, maybe thousands. Made to last and lasting. He stood up, stepped under the awning of a closed flower shop. He opened it. His breath stopped. Cash. A thick fold of $100 bills held together by a silver money clip. He counted with his thumb, moving slow, 1 bill at a time. Then he counted again because the first time felt like something he might have misread. 140 bills, $14,000. He stood there with $14,000 in his hands under a flower shop awning, while the rain tapped the canvas overhead, and every thought he had ever had about money arrived at once, and crashed into the single fact of holding it, in his hands, right now, and no one watching. Behind the cash, 3 cards. All black, all heavy in the specific way of cards that don't need to prove anything because the people who carry them have long since stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. The name on each one was the same. Edmund A. Hargrove. Behind the cards, a New York State driver's license. Same name. Photograph of a man, older, silver hair, sharp eyes with something behind them that photographs always hinted at and never quite reached. Bryce closed the wallet, stood very still. His mind did what it always did when numbers that mattered showed up in front of him. Not celebrate, calculate. Immediately and without mercy. $600 first month's rent on a room in East New York, the cheapest listing he'd found on the library computer 3 weeks back. $1,200 for a deposit. 2 months covered before anything else. Then, food. Real food. Not food heading for a dumpster that someone with a soft heart redirected before it got there. A phone plan for Caleb, data included. Something that while outside library Wi-Fi range. A semester of community college. For Caleb. For the code in the notebook. For the 2 applications living on a free hosting platform that nobody visited except Caleb's himself, who kept improving them anyway, because building things was the only time his mind went fully quiet. $14,000 could do all of that. $14,000 could change the specific shape of what the next 2 years looked like for both of them. $14,000 was in his hands right now. The street was empty, and Edmund A. Hargrove had an address that wasn't here, and cards that were black cards. Man, I would not miss $9,000 away. A person who needed $14,000 would miss it. All of this moved through Bryce Okafor's mind and the time it takes a traffic light to change colors. Then he closed the wallet, put it in his pocket, and turned around and walked back toward the bridge. Not toward Dots, not toward the shift. Not toward the 3 hours over the sink that left his hands red and cracked and smelling like industrial soap. Back toward the bridge. Back toward Caleb. Because there was no version of this decision he made alone. When he came in under the overpass, Caleb looked up from the notebook. This was unusual. Caleb did not usually look up when Bryce came back. He looked up now because Bryce had come back wrong. Wrong time, wrong direction, wrong energy coming off him. Caleb looked at Bryce's face. Then at Bryce's jacket pocket, then at the wallet Bryce held out toward him without saying a word. He took it, opened it, looked at the money. His lips parted slightly, just enough to let out a breath that wasn't quite a word and wasn't quite a sound, but existed somewhere between the two. He looked at the cards, read the name, looked at the license, looked at the address printed below the photograph. Then he looked at his brother. Silence between them was the loudest thing under that bridge. It pressed against the concrete pillar. It sat in the damp air between the two of them. 10 seconds, maybe 15. And in those 15 seconds, both of them did the math, and both of them knew the other was doing it, and neither of them said a word about it, because the math had never been the point. The math had not been the point since the last night of their mother's life, when she looked at Bryce with eyes that had been tired for a long time and said the things she needed to say. Plainly, steadily, the way she said every true thing. Take care of your brother. Take care of each other. That's all I ask. He hadn't heard her voice since that night. Not in any way that could be explained in regular conversation. But standing in that space under the bridge with his brother holding someone else's wallet, he heard it. Not memory. Something more physical. A weight behind the sternum. A pressure. The specific sensation of being watched by someone who already knew what you were going to choose and was waiting for you to catch up to it. Bryce said quietly, "It's not ours, that was all." Caleb closed the wallet, set it down on the cardboard beside the notebook, reached for his shoes, pulled them on, stood up. Let's go find him. And that was that. They left together into the gray morning, 2 20-year-old black men walking out from under a Brooklyn overpass, wet, wearing everything they owned, carrying $14 that belonged to a stranger they were walking toward through sheer force of something their mother had put in them. So long ago it had become structural. This is where you need to know who Gloria Okafor was, not what happened to her. That part arranged itself into a sentence without any effort. Gloria Okafor, 41 years old, dead of stage 4 lung cancer in a hallway at Kings County Hospital on a Tuesday night in March. 8 months before the morning, Bryce found the wallet. Those are the facts. They are not who she was. Who she was is harder to put into a single sentence, because the thing about certain people is that their side doesn't compress. You try to summarize them, and something essential falls off the edge. Gloria Okafor was the kind of person whose presence in a room changed the room's temperature. Not loudly, not through performance, but through the simple force of being fully herself in it, without apology and without theater. She raised her sons alone from the time they were 3 years old. Their father was a man named Curtis Delaney who had left one night looking for cigarettes and had not returned. No phone call, no letter, no explanation of any kind. Just an empty chair at the kitchen table that Gloria eventually replaced with a bookshelf, which she filled with library's bull books and a set of encyclopedias from 1994 that were outdated but still had facts in them. And facts were facts regardless of the year they'd been printed. She worked nights because nights paid better. Commercial cleaning, midtown office buildings, floors 17 through 42 of the kind of glass towers where decisions got made about things that affected other people's lives. She cleaned the rooms where those decisions happened. She emptied the trash cans. She mopped the floors at 2 in the morning after everyone who mattered to the building had gone home. No mask. The company didn't require it. The chemicals in the spray bottles were industrial grade, the kind designed to work quickly and leave no smell in the carpet. What they left instead was in the air, and then in the lungs. Slowly, for 17 years, in amounts too small to notice until they weren't. She found out she was sick at 40 years old, not from a doctor. She couldn't afford regular appointments, had missed the window where it might have been caught early, had kept working through symptoms that she attributed to exhaustion because exhaustion was the most available explanation for everything when you worked 2 jobs and raised 2 boys alone. She found out in a bathroom at the office building on a Thursday night when she couldn't stand up for 10 minutes after coughing and there was blood on the tissue in her hand. Stage 4. The doctor said it the way doctors say things that can't be fixed. Gently, without a door out. 8 months later, she was gone. She was gone in a hallway at Kings County Hospital because the oncology ward was full and there wasn't a room available, and the hallway was what there was. And Bryce was on one side of the narrow hospital bed, and Caleb was on the other, and that specific silence, the silence of a room where someone who was in it is no longer in it, came in and settled around both of them and never fully left. Before that night, on a Sunday when the boys were 12, she had sat them both down at the kitchen table after dinner and told them 2 things, she says. Schools is the only door nobody can take away from you once you've walked through it, she said. The only real way to take care of yourself is to take care of the person next to you, because the person next to you is the most real thing there is. Bryce had been eating the rest of his green beans. Caleb had been looking at the table. They were 12. They were not fully paying attention, but it went in. Things said at kitchen tables between a mother and her children always go in, whether anyone is paying attention or not. The kitchen table is the original architecture of instruction. Everything else is just commentary. When they were 17, Bryce came home one evening to find Caleb at the kitchen table with 3 books open in front of him, making notes in the margins with a mechanical pencil that clicked when the lead got too short. He was teaching himself to code, not from school, from a library book, from a YouTube tutorial watched 3 times on the library computer, from a forum thread printed out at 7 cents a page on the library printer. Gloria looked over at this from the kitchen counter where she was making rice. She said nothing. She brought a plate of food to the table and set it down beside the open books without disturbing a single page and walked back to the counter. That was how she loved. Precisely. Without ceremony, without making the love itself into something that required a response. After she died, the systems tried to catch them. Tried. A social worker, young and overwhelmed and managing 47 cases, sat them down in an office with a motivational poster on the wall and a plant that needed water and gave them a list of 8 emergency shelters. 5 were at capacity. 2 had numbers that rang without answer. 1 said to call back in 3 weeks. They applied for housing assistance. Waitlist position 412. Estimated time plans in notes 14 months. A follow-up call was scheduled for 6 weeks later. The call was never made, not because anyone meant them harm, because the person who was supposed to make the call had 47 cases and something more urgent came up. And Bryce and Caleb were 20 years old, and they were therefore technically adults and technically capable of managing, which was technically true the same way it is technically true that you can walk on a broken foot if you have no other option. One thing was left of Gloria, a green parka, faded with a broken zipper and a tears along the left pocket, sewn shut with dark thread. She had worn it to every overnight shift for 6 years. It smelled like her still, cocoa butter and laundry detergent, and something underneath both of those that neither of them could name, but both recognized the way you recognize a piece of music on your body knew before your brain did. They took turns wearing it. Bryce on odd nights, Caleb on even ones. It was the warmest thing they owned. It was not warm enough, which was a true thing that didn't become less true from not being said. 8 months after Gloria died, on a rainy Tuesday morning in October, Bryce Okafor stood under a flower shop awning with $14,000 in his hands and turned around and walked back. The walk to the Hargrove building from the bridge was 32 minutes. Bryce counted blocks, not to pass the time, but because counting is something his hands understood when his mind was doing something too large for regular thought. They walked through the drizzle, across the bridge, up into Manhattan, the buildings growing taller and cleaner and more self-assured with each block the way money arranged itself in space, gradually and then entirely. The lobby. 40 feet of white marble floor polished to a mirror finish. A waterfall feature along the back of the wall, the sound of water moving over stone, which was a particular kind of unnecessary thing that existed only to communicate, without words, where you were and who was expected here. Soxa walked through the revolving door first, Caleb one step behind. Side by the time they reached the reception desk, which was long and pale and staffed by a man named Hector with a shaved head and a dark suit who looked up from his screen and began the process of deciding something, while appearing not to decide anything. "Can I help you?" Not a question. Almost, but not quite. "We're looking for Edmund Hargrove," Bryce said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, then I can't." We wound his wallet. Caleb said it the way Caleb said most things. Flat, direct, no interest in being impressive or dramatic. He placed the wallet on the edge of the desk. Hector looked at it, looked at them, looked at the wallet again. He picked up the phone, turned his back, spoke low for about 30 seconds. When he turned around, his expression had shifted. Not warm, just different, like a locked door that had been nudged open a quarter inch. "Someone's coming down," he said. "Wait here." They waited. The lobby moved around them. Business people crossing the marble with purpose in every stride. A woman in a gray blazer stepped around Caleb's shoulder without looking at him, the way you step around a piece of furniture, the kind of not looking that was more complete than actual blindness. Caleb watched her go, did not say anything. 4 minutes later, the elevator opened. The woman who stepped out was in her early 50s, auburn hair, short. Reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She walked with the efficiency of someone who's had been solving other people's problems for a long time and had developed a matching stride. Direct, no wasted movement, Sylvia Ware, executive assistant to Edmund Hargrove, 14 years. The woman who knew where everything was, and what it meant when Edmund's hand curled into a fist at his desk when he thought no one was looking. She came straight to them. Extended her Bryce. "I'm Sylvia, you found Mr. Hargrove's wallet?" Bryce handed it to her. She opened it without removing the cash and counted it by feel, which meant she had handled it before and knew its weight. She checked the cards, the license. Then she turned the wallet over slowly and ran her thumb along the inner side pocket. She knew this wallet. She had watched Edmund reach for it hundreds of times. At the coffee cart downstairs where he still paid with cash, which was a habit his son Damon had teased him about relentlessly, calling him a fossil. And Edmund would laugh that particular way he laughed when someone he loved was giving him a hard time, and he loved being given a hard time by them. Damon, 22 years old, gone 24 months. Still present in every room Edmund walked into, in every object Edmund touched, in the specific way Edmund's expression changed when he thought no one was watching and let himself remember for a second. Sylvia looked up from the wallet. She looked at the two young men in front of her. Wet, thin in the way that had nothing to do with choice. Young in a way that landed on her chest before she could stop it. She did not hand them a thank you envelope and send them on their way. She pressed the elevator button and held the door open. "Come with me." The elevator was fast, 61 floors in under a minute. Bryce watched the numbers climb on the panel display and kept his hands still at his sides and breathed in and out and did not look at Caleb because he didn't need to. Caleb was beside him, right beside him, which was the only place Caleb had ever needed to be. The doors opened. Thick carpet, soft light, coffee and paper, and the silence of a floor where important things happened and then got unmade and then happened again. Sylvia walked them straight to the corner office at the end of the hall. One knock. The door opened. Edmund Hargrove was standing behind his desk when they came in. On the phone, one hand in his jacket pocket, the other holding a coffee cup that had gone cold long enough ago to have stopped mattering. The wall of windows behind him showed all of Manhattan through the rain, rooftops, and cranes, and the East River catching the gray light in thin silver strips. He was 63. Silver hair, sharp eyes, a face that had lived in it. He looked up, saw Sylvia, saw the two men behind her, saw the wallet in her hand. He put the phone down without saying goodbye. Sylvia set the wallet on his desk. "These two gentlemen found on the street," she said. "Everything's inside." Edmund picked it up the way a man picks up something he was afraid was gone, the cash first. Still thick, still clipped. The cards, the license. And then in the slim inner pocket a small square of notebook paper, soft at the creases from being folded and unfolded many times. He opened it, read it, folded it back, slid it into the pocket. He looked at Bryce and Caleb, really looked. Not the way Hector had looked at them downstairs, not that the way the woman in the gray blazer had not looked. He looked at them the way you look at something you were not ready to see. He took in Bryce's torn sleeve, the nylon rope threaded through Caleb's belt loops. Two young men standing in his office, in the wet clothes, with their feet still and their eyes level, and something about the way they were standing, the closeness of it, the shoulder-to-shoulder of it, that said these two people had been each other's only solid ground for long enough that they no longer needed to think about it. "Sit down," he said, quieter than Sylvia expected. They sat, two leather chairs across the desk from him. Edmund sat and placed the wallet between them like something that needed witnessing. $14,000, he said. "You counted it." "Yes, sir," Bryce said. "The cards. You saw the cards. You could have used them. The cash alone, you could have disappeared. No one would have found you." Bryce did not look away. "We would have known." Edmund leaned back. He looked at Bryce, then at Caleb. The silence stretched itself across the desk and did not apologize for how long it took. "The question," said in the room. Caleb looked at his brother. Bryce looked at the wallet, and somewhere between looking at the wallet and opening his mouth, he heard the weight behind his sternum again, the pressure, the thing that was not memory and was not imagination and was both. "Because it's not ours," he said. Simple, final, the way his mother would have said it. Edmund opened his desk drawer and slid an envelope across the surface between them. $1,000, thank you. "Take it." Bryce looked at the envelope, looked at Caleb, looked back at Edmund. "No thank you, sir. We didn't come here for that." Edmund stared at him. One beat, then another, and in Edmund Hargrove's face, in the arrangements of muscles around his eyes and mouth, something shifted. Not visibly, not in a way you could point to. More like a frequency felt in the body before the ears registered sound. A hairline, fractious surface that had been sealed for 2 years. "Where do you live?" Edmund said, carefully, the careful of someone who already suspects the answer and is deciding how to receive it. Bryce was quiet a moment. Caleb answered. "Under a bridge in Brooklyn." Words landed on the marble floor of that corner office like a glass set down too hard. Not breaking. Just landing with more sound than anyone was ready for. Edmund did not flinch, but his hand, resting on the desk beside the wallet, curled slowly and quietly into a fist. Sylvia saw it. She had seen that fist once before. The night at the hospital. The night the doctors came out to the waiting room. "Sylvia," Edmund said. He did not look away from the two young men in front of him. "Clear my afternoon." She nodded. She stepped out and pulled the door closed and stood in the hallway with her hand still on the doorknob, listening to the silence on the other side of it. The silence of a room where something has just shifted into a different shape and will not shift back. She went to her desk. She sat down. She looked at the photograph on the corner of her desk. Damon Hargrove at his college graduation, laughing at something off camera, his whole face in it, all 22 years of him in that laugh. She looked at it for a long time. Then she opened the calendar and started clearing the afternoon, one appointment at a time, making room for whatever Edmund had just decided was going to happen next. The report came back on Thursday. 11 pages, single-spaced, delivered to Sylvia's desk in a plain manila envelope by a man named Aldous Webb, who charged a significant amount of money to find out everything about people who didn't know they were being found out about. Edmund had used him twice before, both times for business due diligence. This is the first time he had used him for something he could not have explained to his board of directors. He read it alone in his office with the door closed. Page 1. Dates. The skeleton of two lives sampled from public records. Bryce Okafor, Caleb Okafor, twins, 20 years old. Born Kings County Hospital, same Tuesday in October. Bryce 11 minutes first. Page 2. Gloria. He read slowly through page 2. Gloria Okafor, 41, commercial cleaning staff, Midtown office buildings, 17 years continuous employment. No protective equipment beyond the legal minimum, which was less than what the work actually required, which was a gap that existed in buildings all over the city, and which nobody with the power to close it had gotten around to closing. Lung cancer, stage 4, diagnosed late, died in a hallway at Kings County Hospital in March because the oncology ward was full. Set the report down. He looked out the window at Manhattan, doing what Manhattan did on a Thursday morning, which was everything at once, loudly, without any awareness of being watched. He thought about the hallway. He thought about a woman who had cleaned the offices of people who made decisions about other people's lives, who had done this for 17 years without a mask, who had died in a hallway because there wasn't a room. He picked the report back up. Pages 3 and 4 covered the housing system, the list of 8 shelters, 5 at capacity, 2 unanswered, 1 that said, call back in 3 weeks. It's the housing assistance application, waitlist position 412, estimated 14 months, follow-up calls scheduled and never made. Not malicious, just the math of a system with too many people in it and not enough of everything else. Pages 5 through 7 were Bryce. His schedule at Dot Freeman's Diner on Tillery Street, described by Alts as the kind of schedule a man keeps when he has made a private agreement with himself and intends to honor it. 3 hours every morning before the breakfast rush, $18 cash. Whatever food's heading for disposal, wrapped carefully and carried back. Aldous had spoken briefly with Dot Freeman, her exact words transcribed. The most reliable person I've hired in 30 years of running this place. Bryce split everything he earned with his brother, kept nothing for himself, had been offered work at 2 other restaurants, and had turned both down because the hours would have conflicted with Caleb's time at the library. Someone needed to walk him home after dark. Edmund read that line again. Someone needed to walk him home after dark. He set the report on his desk and sat with that sentence for a moment, the way you sit with something that has weight to it, not processing it, just letting it exist in the room. Page 8 was Caleb, self-taught, Brooklyn Public Library, Flatbush Avenue branch, every afternoon until closing. He had learned Python first, then JavaScript, then enough front-end development to build 2 functioning applications on a free hosting service, a weather dashboard, a personal finance tool designed specifically for people living below the federal poverty line, which meant it accounted for irregular income, cash payment, expenses without receipts, the specific financial texture of a life that standard budgeting software had never been designed for, because the people who built budgeting software had never needed to budget the way the people who needed it did. The code was clean. Aldous had flagged this specifically, which told Edmund that Aldous had shown it to someone who knew what clean code looked like. Both applications were live. Neither had significant traffic. A librarian named Sandra Owens had written Caleb a letter of recommendation for a community college program. He had never submitted the application. The fee was $45. Edmund read that sentence, read it again, put the report face down on his desk. He sat in his chair for a long time after that. Not working, not on the phone. Just sitting in the stillness of a man who has read something that has rearranged the way his interior life is organized and needs a moment before he can move through it without running into things. He had spent $45 on the coffee going cold at his elbow. He had spent more than $45 on things he could not now remember spending it on. $45 had stood between Caleb Okafor and a door. Edmund stood up, got his coat, did something he had not in 2 years, which was get into his car alone, no driver, no Sylvia, then drive for a reason that had nothing to do with work. He went to Brooklyn. He parked 3 blocks from the overpass and walked. He did not go under. He stood on the sidewalk above, looking down through the chain-link fence at the space below. From up here it was small. 2 sections of cardboard, a tarp, a row of water bottles along the back wall. A piece of plywood balanced across two cinder blocks that functioned as a shelf. Makeshift but deliberate, the kind of thing they're built by someone who had decided they were going to maintain To's organization regardless of what the circumstances said about whether that was worth doing. On the shelf, a framed photograph, too far away to see the face, but he could see the green coat. He stood there for 15 minutes. Cars passed behind him, so someone walked a dog with grass without looking up. Brooklyn kept going, the way Brooklyn kept going, which was without pausing for any individual person's reckoning. He walked back to his car, sat in it for 20 minutes with the engine running and the heat on, and both hands on the wheel. He cried for the first time in 2 years, not for Damon, not for himself. For two boys who had organized a tarp and a row of water bottles and put a framed photograph on a plywood shelf, because even in that space they were trying to build something that looked like a home. The phone call went out on Friday afternoon. Sylvia made it at 4:15, and her voice carried the warmth of someone conveying an invitation she personally approved of. She reached Bryce as he was walking back from Dot's with a thermos of coffee. Dot had pressed into his hands with the look of a woman who had decided that arguing with her was not worth the energy it required. Mr. Hargrove would like to invite you and your brother to dinner this evening. His home. 7 o'clock. A car will pick you up wherever you'd like. Bryce almost said no. His first response, formed before he finished hearing the sentence, was no. Dinner at the home of a man with 61 floors of office space. Two young men from under a bridge, sitting at a table that wasn't designed for them. The shape of it felt like something he'd experienced before, not this specifically, but the category of it. The invitation that turned out to be the setup for something else, something that required you to be grateful in a particular way, and perform the gratitude back. He called Caleb. Explained the call, the car. 7 o'clock. Brief silence on the line. We should go, Caleb said. The car was black on interior, the color of cream, smelling like something neutral and clean. That wasn't cologne or cleaning product, but suggested both. The driver did not make conversation. He drove them through the tunnel and up into Manhattan and north along the avenue with the efficiency of someone who had been transporting people who didn't need impressive for long enough that impressing them had stopped being a consideration. Caleb sat with his hands on his knees and watched the city through the window. Bryce sat with his hands folded and said nothing. They didn't need to talk. There was nothing to say that they didn't already both know, and what they both knew didn't require words to reign true. The building on the Upper West Side was a brownstone. 4 stories, dark brick, wide front steps, a single light above the door. Not what Bryce had expected. He had expected glass, height, something that announced itself the way things announced them when they had the resource to do so. This was the opposite. A home that had stopped needing to explain itself to the street. Edmund opened the door before they knocked. He was wearing a sweater, dark blue, slightly worn at the left cuff, no jacket, no tie. He looked like a different version of the man in the corner office, smaller in the way that people are smaller when they have set down the weight they carry earning business hours and are just standing in their own doorway, being whatever they actually are when no one requires anything of them. Thank you for coming, he said. He meant it. You could hear it, not as performance, but as fact. The dining table was set for 3. White plates, good silverware, cloth napkins, roasted chicken, still steaming, green beans, mashed potatoes with a crater of butter dissolving in the middle, a basket of bread with a cloth folded over it. Bryce sat down and looked at the silverware arranged beside his plate. 3 forks, 2 knives, 2 spoons. He looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at the arrangement with the expression of someone encountering a system whose computation he had not been given access to. Edmund noticed. He did not explain or offer a guide. He reached across, picked up the chicken leg with his bare hand, bit into it, set it down on his plate, grease on his fingers. A small, deliberate act against his own table's formality. Bryce exhaled. Caleb almost smiled. They ate, not elegantly, thoroughly. The chicken was good. The potatoes were better. The bread had a crust that cracked when broken, and neither of them had eaten bread like this in a long time, and neither of them said so. And Edmund watched them eat with an expression that had nothing performed in it, and everything attentive. After a while, the pace of eating slowed. Edmund leaned back, set his fork down, folded his hands. I'm going to be direct with you, he said. Both of them went still in the way people go still when they've learned that the sentence following I'm going to be direct is always the sentence that matters. I had someone look into your situation. I know about your mother. I know about the shelters. I know about the bridge. He paused, not for effect, just to make sure the landing was right. I'm not telling you this to embarrass you. I want you to understand that what I'm about to offer isn't pity. It isn't charity. He looked at Bryce, then at Caleb. I want to provide you with an apartment. 2 bedrooms, paid for. Full tuition at any college program either of you chooses, fees and books included. And paid positions at Hargrove Group. Real work. Not work I've invented to make the arrangement look reasonable. The room went quiet in a specific way. Bryce shook his head before the quiet had fully settled. We can't accept that, Mr. Hargrove. Why not? Because it's charity. Edmund did not argue, did not raise his voice, did not reach for the tools of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted in rooms where other people wanted different things. He leaned forward, both elbows on the table, and he spoke the way a man speaks when he has been rehearsing something not to perform it, but to make sure he says it correctly. Let me tell you about my son. He said it simply, like beginning a sentence he had needed to begin for a long time. Dahman was 22 when he died. Car accident on the highway 14 months ago. Wet road, a curve, the kind of accident that doesn't have a reason you can hold on to, because there isn't one. He was kind, stubborn about things that didn't matter and flexible about things that did. He used to tell me the worst thing you could do for a person wasn't to fail them. It was to never give them the chance to find out what they were capable of. He looked at Bryce. I didn't understand what he meant until Tuesday morning when 2 young men walked into my loss soaking wet and handed back $14,000 and asked for nothing. He let that sit. This isn't charity. I'm investing in 2 people who proved something about themselves in a moment when nobody was watching. That's not someone who wants a handout. That's someone who deserves a door. Bryce stared at the table. Caleb spoke. Quietly, directly, the way when he had been thinking something for longer than the conversation had been running. Why us? Edmund was quiet, the kind of quiet with weight, the kind that asks you to wait inside it. When he spoke, his voice was different. It's like something underneath it was trying to come up. Because you remind me of him. He did not say Damon's name. He did not need to. The agreement was simple, an apartment, school, work. Edmund would open the door. They would walk through it themselves. Bryce looked at Caleb. Caleb gave one small nod, the kind that didn't need to be large to carry everything it was carrying. Okay, Bryce said, but we pay you back. Every dollar someday. Edmund reached across the table. I'm counting on it. Gerald Polk found out on a Monday, not through rumor, through Sylvia's brief which Edmund had asked her to circulate to senior staff as a matter of professional transparency. Gerald read it at his desk, read it again, and appeared in Edmund's office doorway that same afternoon with the brief in his hand and an expression that occupied the territory between concern and suspicion without fully committing to either. Have you verified them? He said. Edmund was at the window, did not turn around. I know who they are. Knowing their names isn't verification. You've committed resources to 2 people you've met once, twice. Edmund, what is it you actually want to say, Gerald? Gerald came further into the room. Someone who needed money badly found out you had a great deal of it. Now they're in an apartment you're paying for and drawing salaries from your company. I'd be failing in my responsibility if I didn't flag that. Edmund turned around. He looked at Gerald the way you look at someone when you're deciding how much of what you're thinking to say out loud. They gave back $14,000 in cash, he said. No cameras at the right angle, no witnesses. They knew, and they came back anyway. Aldous already ran a full report. I'd like to run my own. A pause. Do what you need to do, Edmund said. You won't find anything. That evening he called a different investigator, not Aldous Webb, someone who charged more and asked fewer questions about the purpose of the inquiry. The instruction was clear. Find something wrong. Gerald Polk had been in finance long enough to believe that apparent goodness was usually goodness that hadn't yet revealed its terms. He was looking for the terms. He was certain they existed. He had not yet met anyone who caused him to revise this belief. He would. Caleb found out about Columbia on a Wednesday afternoon. He was standing at a library computer with his email open. The acceptance had been sent 3 days earlier. He had not checked email in 3 days because checking email required a device with internet. And he had been at Hargrove Group every day that week, sitting in a corner of the technology department with a borrowed laptop, working through 8 months of archived code for a workforce management system that had been patched so many times by so many different engineers, none of whom had spoken to the others, that it had become something like a building where every repair had been made by a different contractor with a different set of materials, and none of them had read the original blueprints. He read all of it, made notes, said almost nothing to anyone. On the 4th day, the head of the department, a woman named Priya, who had been running the team, had a talent for identifying exactly when something was wrong, even when she couldn't immediately articulate what, walked past his desks, stopped, backed up, and looked at his screen. "What is that?" "A diagram," Caleb said. "Of what?" "The redundancies in the routing logic. There are 11. This one causes a 4-second lag every time a shift supervisor logs a manual override. If you restructure this section of the sequence, the lag disappears and 2 of the other redundancies probably go with it." Looked at the screen. "How long to find that?" 2 days. She looked at him with expressions she couldn't fully categorize. Then she said, "Write it up," and walked away. He wrote it up. He found the Columbia email an hour later. 3 paragraphs, full scholarship, computer science, fall semester. He read it once, read it again, closed the tab, opened it, read it a 3rd time. Then he sat back and looked at the ceiling of the Brooklyn Public Library, which he had looked at hundreds of times while working through problems or waiting for pages to load. And this time, what he felt was something that didn't fit neatly into any category he had language for. His mother had said school was the only door nobody could take from you once you walked through it. He called Bryce. Bryce picked up on the 2nd ring. "I got into Columbia," Caleb said. "I know, a beat. How?" "Sylvia told me. Edmund pulled some strings. I was waiting for you to tell me first." Caleb stood at the library computer, looking at the acceptance letter on the screen. "He didn't have to do that," he said. "No," Bryce said. "He didn't." Silent. "I'm scared." A pause that breathed. "Me too," Bryce said. "Go anyway." The apartment was at the edge of Midtown. 2 bedrooms, furnished clean and simple, 2 desks, 2 lamps, a couch facing a window that looked north. Had the bulldozer and a laundry room in the basement, and a superintendent named Felix, who had run the place for 22 years, and who acknowledged Bryce and Caleb on their first day with the same neutral professionalism he extended to everyone, which was its own form of dignity. First night, they both slept on the floor, not because the beds weren't there. They were, made up with clean sheets, blankets folded at the foot, just because the floor was what the body knew, and what the body knew felt safer than what was new. By the 2nd week, they were using the beds. By the 3rd, Caleb had arranged his workspace with the precision of someone who had been composing it in his head for months, and was finally allowed to build it in real space. Laptop open. 2 notebooks, different purposes, a cup of pens that all worked. The composition book with Gloria's handwriting on the first page, set to one side, not closed, not open. Present. He sat down and started working on a new version of the budgeting application. Nobody had asked him to. No one knew he was doing it. He just opened the code because there was a function in the expense tracking module that had been bothering him since he built it, and he finally had enough uninterrupted time to fix it properly. This is when Gerald Polk's investigator filed his report. 9 pages. Gerald read it at his desk on a Tuesday morning with his door closed. His investigator had been thorough. The report covered everything Aldous had covered and then some additional detail. The conclusion was the same. On page 7, there was a note, flagged with a small asterisk at the bottom of the page, separated from the main text. The kind of addition an investigator includes when he feels obligated to include it, but is not sure it falls within the scope of what he was hired to determine. No evidence of strategic behavior or deceptive intent. Pattern across all documented interactions is consistent, regardless of whether a subject was aware of it being observed. These appear to be 2 honest people. Gerald read that line. Read it again. He folded the report and placed it in the left drawer of his desk, which was where he put things he was still deciding about. He did not call Edmund. He did not escalate. He sat with it, which for Gerald Polk in a professional context was the closest thing to doubt he had experienced in a decade. The comment happened on the Thursday in October, Bryce's economics class. Group discussion on mobility and market systems, the kind of discussion that Columbia organized with genuine intention and that produced, in roughly equal measure, genuine insight and something else entirely. The student's name was Everett, polo shirt. Articulate in the way of someone who had spent years learning to say pointed things while maintaining the plausible deniability of having said nothing pointed at all. He delivered his observation to the projection screen at the front of the room, which made it general, which made it about no one specifically, which was exactly the point. Some people earn their place here. Others just get lucky with what they happen to find on the street. The room went quiet. The professor looked at his laptop. Nobody said anything. Bryce did not say anything either. His hands were flat on the desk. He pressed them down. His knuckles, after a moment, were pale at the joints. He looked at the projection screen and kept looking at it and breathed in and breathed out and did not say a single word because he was doing the math on what saying a word would cost him, and the answers was more than Everett was worth. The class continued. It passed the way things pass when something has shifted the air in a room and everyone has agreed without speaking to pretend otherwise. That night, Bryce went home. He pulled the bag from under his bed, the same bag from the bridge. He had never thrown it out, which was something he had not as examined until this moment, the fact that he had never thrown it out. He packed it slowly, not in anger. He folded each thing, 2 shirts, jeans, socks, his toothbrush, the small notebook he kept, different from Caleb's, the kind that held questions without answers. He set the bag beside the door. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the city through the window, not thinking, just looking at the lights. The same lights he had looked at from below for 8 months, from the bridge side, the outside looking inside, and now he was on the inside looking out, and the inside felt, tonight, like something he wasn't certain he had the right to claim. Caleb found him at midnight. He came in from the living room where he had been working, stopped in the doorway, saw the bag beside the door. Saw Bryce on the edge of the bed with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the window. He didn't speak immediately. He walked to his own room and came back with the composition notebook, sat down on the floor across from Bryce, cross-legged back against the wall, the way he used to sit under the bridge. He opened the notebook to the first page and held it up. Gloria's handwriting, blue ink, soft at the edges from age. Take care of each other. That's all I ask. Bryce looked at the page. His jaw was tight. His eyes were dry but burning, which is a different condition from crying and in some ways harder to move through. He sat with it for a long time. Then he leaned forward, unzipped the bag, took out the folded shirts one at a time and set them on the bed beside him, the jeans, the socks. He left the bag open and empty beside the door, not put away, just emptied. It was the best he could do that night, and that night it was enough. Edmund found out the next morning. Sylvia told him, directly, without preface, the way she told him things that required his attention. She told him about Everett, about the packed bag, about Caleb and the notebook at midnight. Edmund stood at his office's window with his hands in his pockets, and the city doing its regular morning business behind the glass, and he did not say anything for a while. That evening he arrived at the apartment without calling ahead. No Sylvia, no driver, just Edmund in a dark jacket, carrying a paper bag from a deli on 74th Street that he had walked into and ordered from without thinking, which he would realize later was significant. That the part of him which knew what was needed had already made the decision before the thinking part caught up. Bryce opened the door, looked at Edmund, looked at the paper bag, looked at Edmund again. He stepped aside. Edmund came in, set the bag on the kitchen counter, took out 2 cents, turkey and Swiss on rye, wrapped in white deli paper, sat down on one of the kitchen stools. Bryce stood on the other side of the counter with his arms crossed, which was the posture of someone who was not going to make this effortless. Sylvia told me, Edmund said. I'm fine. You packed a bag. I unpacked it. I know. Then we're good. Edmund unwrapped his sandwich without eating it yet. After Damon died, I stopped, he said. Everything. I stopped eating properly. I stopped returning calls. I stopped opening the blinds in the morning. I sat in this apartment for 11 days without leaving once. Sylvia came in with the spare key. She brought food, sat in the other chair for a while, didn't say anything, and left. She came back the next day and did the same thing. He looked at Bryce. Running feels like the right move. It feels like logic. Like if you leave before the worst part arrives, you've outrun it. He paused. But the worst part is already in you. It travels with you. Wherever you go, it's already there when you arrive. Bryce said nothing. His arms were still crossed. You're not a project, Edmund said quietly. You're not something I'm managing from a distance. You're not Damon. He said the name, will you say something that cost you to say? You are Bryce, and that is a complete sentence. Caleb appeared in the doorway of his room. He looked at the sandwiches on the counter. He came in, sat down on the other stool, picked up the second sandwich and began unwrapping it. Edmund looked at him. Caleb looked back. Thank you for the food. That was it? That was all of it. They ate. 3 people in a kitchen at 9:30 on a weeknight, eating turkey sandwiches on rye bread, the city lit through the window, nobody performing anything for anyone else. The bag stayed empty beside Bryce's door. In the morning, he put it back under the bed. Gerald Polk's second report confirmed what the first heads. He read the conclusion at his desk on a Monday morning and shredded the document in the machine under his desk and rode the elevator up to Edmund's floor. He knocked, came in, stood in front of the desk. I had them investigated, he said. I know, Edmund said. I didn't find anything. I know. A pause. Gerald looked at the window, looked back the budgeting application Caleb built, the routing fix he wrote up for Priya. He stopped, something moving across his face that was not his usual expression. Those are genuinely good. Not good for someone self-taught. Not good considering the circumstances. Good. Edmund said nothing, watched. I was wrong to be suspicious, Gerald said. He said it the way a man says something he has practiced and still finds difficult when the moment requires it. Not an apology, exactly. A correction, an internal account being squared. He left without waiting for Edmund to respond. That same afternoon, he stopped by Caleb's and the capital of the tech department. He put a single sheet of paper down on the surface. Caleb looked at it. A printout of the budgeting application's interface, with a circle drawn around a section of the financial calculation module, and a note in Gerald's small, precise handwriting pointing to the interest compounding logic. There's an error in the monthly calculation, Gerald said. Here. It's about the section. You're right. Fix it. Gerald turned to leave. Stop did not turn back around. Good product, he said. Then he walked away. Caleb looked at the paper for a moment. Then he opened his laptop and fixed the error. He didn't tell Bryce about the visit until dinner, and when he did, he said it the way he said most things, without editorializing. Gerald came by my desk today. Yeah? Said there was a bug in my code. Was he right? Yes, pause. He also said the app was good. Bryce looked up from his plate. Caleb looked back with the expression of a man still computing what it meant to receive something he had not known he needed until it arrived. Huh, Bryce said. Yeah, Caleb said. They finished eating. Outside the window, Brooklyn ran south toward the water. The bridge was 4 blocks east of where Edmund's brownstone would eventually be, though neither of them knew that yet. Under the overpass, the space they had left was occupied by someone else now, which was what that space was for. Caleb went back to his desk after dinner. He opened the composition notebook to the first page and looked at Gloria's handwriting for a moment. Then he turned to a blank page near the back and opened a new file on his laptop. At the top of the file, in the content field where developers left to themselves, he typed, "For the woman who taught me that systems only work when someone cares enough to maintain them." He didn't say who the woman was. He closed the comment and started writing code. The city ran on outside the window. The notebook stayed open on the desk beside him, the Gloria's handwriting on the first page facing up, not as instruction anymore, but as something closer to company. The particular presence of someone who is gone and still somehow entirely in the room. The article ran on a Wednesday. Page 6 of the print edition. Front page of the website by noon. By 2 in the afternoon, it had been shared enough times that the number had stopped being a number and had become a condition, the kind of condition a story reaches when it's touched something people didn't know they were carrying until a headline named it for them. Bryce found out the way you find out about most things you weren't ready for. Someone sent it to him. A classmate, well-meaning, the person who forwards things with a subject line that says, "Thought you should see this," which is almost always the subject line of something that requires sitting down before you finish reading it. He read it standing in the hallway outside his morning lecture. It was accurate. That was the strange part. The facts were right. The timeline was right. The details about the bridge and the money and the lobby arranged themselves in the article with the precision of someone who had done real reporting, which made it harder to dismiss and easier to feel opened up by, because being exposed accurately is its own specific variety of violation. The story was true. It was also no longer only his. He put his phone in his pocket. He went to class. He did not look at the comment section that day or the next. He found out about the comments from Caleb, who had read them once with the systematic thoroughness he applied to everything, and had then described the distribution to Bryce the way a doctor describes a sense of result. 60% supportive, 30% skeptical in the specific register of people who had decided the world did not contain genuine goodness and were committed to defending that position against all incoming evidence. 10% the kind of thing that existed to remind you the distance between a thought and a published statement had collapsed entirely, and not everyone had adjusted well to this. Bryce read them once. He did not read them again. At Columbia, the comments took a different form. Nobody said anything directly to his face, which was its own kind of statement about the place, about how cruelty had learned to deduce itself in the vocabulary of critical inquiry. The temperature of certain rooms changed when he walked in. Conversations that had been general became subtly specific without anyone announcing the shift. The kind of silences that have texture. 3 weeks after the article ran in his business strategy class, Everett made a comment during a group presentation on nonprofit funding models. He set it to the projection screen at the front of the room, which was his established method. The technique of someone who had learned that remarks directed at surfaces were harder to formally object to than remarks directed at people. He said these initiatives only worked when beneficiaries had genuine merit rather than circumstantial appeal. The room did not respond. The professor looked at his keyboard. Bryce wrote 3 words in his notebook, crossed them out, wrote them again, put the pen down. He went home that afternoon and did not pack the bag. This was the thing he was most proud of and the thing he told no one. He went home and sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the city and breathed. In, out, the plain mechanical fact of a body that had come through harder things than a remark from a person who had never been hungry and had organized his worldview around never having to imagine what that felt like. He was still sitting there at 11 when his phone buzzed. Edmund, not Sylvia. Edmund, you still awake? I'm downstairs. Bryce looked at the message, looked at the time, looked at the lights through the window. He went downstairs. Edmund was standing on the front step in a dark jacket with his collar up against the October air, holding nothing. No bag, no food, no reason that could be traced back to business or obligation. Just Edmund Hargrove on a sidewalk in Brooklyn at 11 at night because he had decided to be there. Bryce stood in the doorway. You didn't have to come, he said. I know, Edmund said, a pause. Caleb texted you, he said, and I'm quoting him directly. Bryce is fine, but he would tell you he's fine even if he wasn't. So I'm telling you he's fine so you have the complete picture. Bryce made a sound that was mostly a laugh. Edmund smiled. The particular smile of a man relearning what it felt like to be the reason someone laughed. Carrying it carefully, the way you carry something you've been without long enough to have forgotten its weight. Walk with me, Edmund said. They walked south along the street. Edmund with his hands in his pockets, and Bryce with his jacket zipped. 2 people covering ground for the sake of covering ground, which is one of the oldest forms of conversation that doesn't announce itself as conversation. I read the article, Bryce said after a while. I know. It's accurate, yes. That almost makes it worse. Edmund walked. The comments, Bryce said. Some of them decided we were running a con before they finished the first paragraph, before they read a single fact. He paused. Doesn't it do something to you? What they say about you, too. Edmund was quiet for half a block. It used to, he said. When I was younger and believed that the opinion of strangers was information about me, rather than information about themselves. He turns up his collar against the wind. The people who wrote the worst things have never stood on a sidewalk at 5 in the morning with $14,000 in their hands and nobody watching. They cannot imagine what that costs to give back. So they reach for a different explanation, because the true one asks something of them. What does it ask? To believe that people can be genuinely good without an angle, and if they believe that, they have to look at the angles they've been running and ask themselves some questions. Bryce walked, The kid in my class, he said. Everett. He's going to keep doing it. Probably. I don't know what the right response is. When I say nothing, it feels like I'm letting it pass. When I think about saying something, I feel like I'm making him the story when he's not worth being the story. Edmund considered this without rushing. Your mother dealt with people like that, he said. Her whole working life. That Bryce looked at the pavement. Every day. What did she do? A pause. She went home, Bryce said. She made dinner. She helped us with what we needed. She went back the next morning. She just kept being who she was. Yeah. Edmund nodded. That's the answer. Bryce walked another half block with that sitting in him. It doesn't feel like enough, he said. It never does. But it's the only thing that actually works over time. People like Everett need your reaction to be the story. You keep being Bryce Okafor, and eventually the gap between who he says you are and who you are becomes so wide that people not paying attention will miss it. And people not paying attention were never the ones who mattered. They had turned south without deciding to, and now the overpass was visible 3 blocks east. Neither of them pointed at it. Both of them saw it. They stood at the corner for a moment. I don't miss it, Bryce said, testing the truth of it as he said it. Good, Edmund said. I think about whoever's sleeping there now, though, every day. Whether they know about the fountain at Cadman Plaza, whether they have a tarp. Edmund looked at him for a long moment. Hold on to that, he said. That's the material you build something real with. They walked back. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Sylvia called Bryce at 8:47 in the morning, 9 minutes before his first class. And her voice had the quality of someone carrying information that required careful handling. Is there something you need to know before you hear it somewhere else? She said. Bryce stepped off the path and stood with his back to the flow of students passing behind him. Someone contacted Edmund's office this morning. A man named Curtis Delaney. He says he's your father. The air in Bryce's chest did something. This wasn't a sound, a pressure, a sudden recalibration of something interior, like a room rearranging itself in the dark. He sent a letter through a lawyer, Sylvia continued. He's seen the article. He says he wants to make contact. He says, and I'm reading directly from the letter now, that he wants to be informed of any legal proceedings involving his sons. His sons. I stood on a path outside the Columbia building with the October sky gray overhead and students moving around him in both directions, and the word sons is in his ear like something that had arrived in the wrong house. Okay, he said. Edmund wants to know how you'd like to handle it. Can you send me the letter? She sent it. He read it twice standing there on the path. Then he called Caleb. Caleb answered on the first ring, which meant he had been waiting. You saw the letter, Bryce said. Sylvia called me too, said silence. Caleb, I know. You okay? A pause long enough to breathe through twice. I'm trying to separate what I actually feel from what I think I'm supposed to feel, Caleb said. Because what I actually feel is, he stopped. Started again. He left when we were 3. He was somewhere in another state while Mom worked nights without a mask for 17 years. He didn't call when she got sick. He didn't show up when she died. He didn't show up when we had nowhere to go, and no one was calling back, and every shelter on the list was full. And now we're in the newspaper, and he wants to be informed of legal proceedings involving his sons. His sons. Yeah, Bryce said. He's not our father, Caleb said. He's someone who shares our biology and read our names in a headline. Bryce leaned against the wall of the building, above him a window. Inside it the economics lecture he was about to miss. He found he had no feeling about this at all. We could meet him, Bryce said. Not because he wanted to. Because he needed to say it out loud to find out what it felt like when he heard it back. It felt like nothing, less than nothing. No, Caleb said. The single syllable of someone who has arrived at the end of a calculation and is reporting the result. Flat. Quiet in the way Caleb was quiet when something was completely settled. I'm not sitting across all trouble from a man who wants the experience of being forgiven without having asked to be. I'm not giving him the satisfaction of watching us process something he caused. Bryce said nothing. We have a father, Caleb said. He showed up at 11 at night with nothing but a jacket and walked around the block with you because it was Bodzing Day. Something Bryce's stress released. Not all at once, not everything, but a specific knot, a particular tension that lived in the space where a father was supposed to be and wasn't, from the time they were 3 years old, loosened, not gone, just no longer pulled as tight. Yeah, he said. Yeah, Caleb said. They said. They stayed on the line without speaking. Go to class, Caleb said. You go to class? I'm already in class? I've been in class this whole conversation. Is that impressive or concerning? The lecture is on data normalization. I could teach the Go be humble. Call me later. Bryce called Edmund instead. Edmund picked up on the second ring. I know, he said, before Bryce said anything. We're not going to meet him, Bryce said. Okay, he doesn't get to show up now. He doesn't get to arrive when there's something in it for him. And call that fatherhood. Okay. Is that the right choice? Because I keep going back and forth on whether refusing is strength or whether it's Bryce. Edmund said gently, you don't owe anyone access to your life because of biology. The people who earn the right to be in your life are the ones who show up when it's inconvenient for them, not when it's advantageous. Bryce was quiet. He didn't come when your mother was in the hospital, Edmund said. He didn't come when you had nowhere to sleep. He read a story in the news and decided this was the moment to make contact. That's not a father. That's someone with a sense of timing. We want to respond to the letter, Bryce said. We need a clear line. We need there to be a moment where we said no and he received it and then it was finished. Then we'll write it. They wrote it that evening, not Edmund. Bryce and Caleb the kitchen table, the composition notebook open nearby, though neither of them looked at it. One sentence. We have nothing to say to you, not cruel, not elaborate. Not the kind of sentence that invited a response or suggested a conversation could still happen if the conditions were right. A door being closed, not slammed. The difference between those two things mattering in ways that were hard to articulate but easy to feel. They sent it through Edmund's lawyer. Curtis Delaney did not write back. Gerald Polk came to Caleb's desk on a Thursday morning. He stood there for a moment without saying anything, which was not Gerald's way. Gerald was a man who arrived in spaces with a clear purpose and departed when the purpose was fulfilled. Standing without speaking was not part of his usual operating procedure. Caleb looked up from his screen. Gerald said the application fee for community college, $45. Caleb waited. I read it in Aldous Webb's report, Gerald said. Page 8. I read it, and then I sat in my office for a while. He stopped, looked at the wall behind Caleb's desk, and then back at Caleb. I want you to know that I investigated you. Both of you. I had my own investigator, separate from Aldous, and I gave him a specific instruction. He paused. The instruction was to find something wrong. Caleb looked at him steadily. I know, Caleb said. Sylvia. No, I noticed things. The way certain information moved through the building. I've spent enough time studying systems to recognize when one is running a background process. Gerald stared at him for a moment. You're 20 years old, he said. Yes, Gerald put his hands in his pockets. I didn't find anything wrong. Because there was nothing wrong to find. And I want to say directly to you that I was wrong to look, and I was wrong in the assumptions I brought into the looking. He said it the way a precise man says something imprecise, which is with visible effort and without decoration. Caleb looked at him. Thank you, he said, for saying to my face. Gerald nodded once. Turned to go. Stopped with his back still to Caleb. The budget forecasting module, the one the finance team uses every quarter and complains about every quarter. Do you have capacity to look at it? Caleb turned to his screen. I'll have something for you by Friday. Gerald left without responding, which Caleb had already understood meant yes. He opened a new file. At the top in the comment field, he typed, for the woman who taught me that systems only work when someone cares enough to fix them properly. Then he got to work. The call from Sylvia came on a Tuesday in November, 8:47 in the morning. She reached Bryce as he was walking across the Columbia campus, collar up, coffee in hand. The particular purposeful walk of a person who has learned that forward motion is its own form of stability. Mr. Hargrove needs you and Caleb at a meeting tomorrow, Sylvia said. 10 o'clock, I'll text you the address. What kind of meeting? The kind he'd like to explain to you himself. Bryce looked at the sky. Sylvia, yes. Is everything okay? A pause, precisely long enough to carry meaning without creating alarm. Everything is very okay, she said. He texted Caleb the address when it came through. Caleb responded 18 seconds later. That's a courthouse. Bryce stared at his phone. His first thought was Curtis Delaney. His second was the article. His third was Gerald's investigation. His fourth thought had more slowly, and it was this. He had spent most of his life preparing for the worst available interpretation of any situation. And maybe it's just this once. That preparation was not what the moment required. He texted back, "I know. Are we in trouble?" "I don't think so." "Then why a courthouse? I don't know. Edmund wants to tell us himself." A longer pause. Then Caleb texted, "What do I wear?" And Bryce, in the middle of a Tuesday morning while crossing the Columbia campus on the way to a lecture he was now thinking about skipping, laughed out loud, alone on the path. A woman walking past looked at him, and then looked away in the way people looked away from things that were happening without them. He laughed for a few seconds, then texted back, "Your best." They went the next morning in their best clothes, Bryce in the Navy suit. First suit he had ever owned that was his. He had bought it 4 months ago from a store on Fifth Avenue, where a woman named Patricia had spent 45 minutes with him finding something that fit correctly and had not once made like he was somewhere he didn't belong, which was its own small and significant thing. He had worn it twice. Once for a presentation at Hargrove Group. Once for a Columbia career fair where 3 companies had requested follow-up conversations, which he had not yet mentioned to Edmund because he was still figuring out how he felt about it. Caleb wore a charcoal blazer over a dark shirt. He had put the compositionist notebook in the inside pocket without thinking about it, which was the kind of thing that happened when an object had been part of you long enough that your hands knew where it went without asking your brain. The courthouse was in Lower Manhattan, a building that had been performing authority for 100 years and had gotten very good at it. Wide steps, heavy doors, hallways where every footstep sounded more deliberate than intended. The room was small. Wood panel walls, rows of wooden chairs with curved backs. An American flag in the corner. A judge's bench at the front that had the weight of every decision ever made from it still present in the wood. Sylvia was in the second row. She was holding a tissue. Her eyes were already red, which was information Bryce filed immediately and did not say anything about. Edmund stood at the front of the room beside an attorney in a charcoal suit. His hands were clasped. He was wearing a navy tie with thin silver stripes that Bryce had never seen before, which meant he had bought it for today specifically, which meant today was the kind of day you bought something new for. Edmund Hargrove, who had stood in boardrooms full of people with more leverage than most institutions, was nervous. His hands were clasped too tightly. His weight was forward. The particular stillness of a man holding himself together through concentration rather than ease. Because ease was not available. Because what was happening in the next few minutes mattered more than most things that had happened in the past 2 years, and he knew it, and the knowing of it was the thing making his hands too tight. He looked at Bryce and Caleb when they came in, the look of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment for a long time and is now watching it arrive and discovering that it was simpler than receiving it. They sat in the front row. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s, silver hair, glasses, the movement of someone who had presided over every variety of human circumstance a room like this could hold and had made her peace with all of it without losing her attentiveness to any of it. She settled at the bench, opened the file in front of her, adjusted her glasses. "Case number 2026-80450-1, she said, in the matter of the petition for adoption filed by Edmund Arthur Hargrove. The room changed, not loudly. The air changed. The way air changes when a window is opened that has been closed for a very long time, not a dramatic shift. Just the sudden presence of something that had not been there a moment before. Bryce stopped breathing. Caleb's hand found his brother's arm. His fingers closed around the fabric of the Navy suit, not gripping, just present, just saying in a language they had spoken since, before they had words for anything. "I am here, and I am not going anywhere." Edmund stepped forward. He looked at the judge. Then he turned around. He looked at Bryce and Caleb, the way a man looks when he is about to say something that cannot be unsaid, and has decided that unsayable things are precisely the ones worth saying. "Your Honor," he said. His voice was steady. Underneath it, something that was not steady. The specific quality of controlled emotion, present, tamed, and very close to the surface. "I would like to formally adopt Bryce and Caleb Okafor as my sons." The silence that followed had weight you could feel in your chest. It pressed against the wooden chairs, against the flag in the corner, against the judge's bench and the paneled walls. The silence of a sentence that had divided the room into before it was said and after was a different place entirely. Bryce's vision blurred. He did not blink. He kept his eyes open. He was not going to miss this by looking away. 14 months. 14 months of Sunday dinners and late evening sandwiches and conversations on sidewalks in the October cold. Edmund showing up without calling ahead because it was a hard day, and he knew it was a hard day without being told. Edmund picking up the chicken leg with his bare hands at that first dinner because he saw two young men uncertain about the silverware, and he wanted them to be comfortable in his home more than he wanted to observe his own table's formality. Edmund at the window of his office after Sylvia told him about the packed bag, standing there with his hands in his pockets, the city moving behind the glass. 14 months of a door being opened, and held open, and held open, and held open. The judge looked at Caleb. "Caleb Okafor," she said, "do you consent to this adoption?" Caleb opens his mouth. Nothing came out. He pressed his lips together. His chin moved in the specific way of a face trying to contain something larger than the space available for containing it. A sound escaped, not a word. Something between a breath and something else entirely, the sound of a person who has held himself together through cardboard floors and closed library doors and $45 fees and 8 months of wet concrete and 1,000 small and large indignities that accumulate when the world does not have a designated place for you. Finally, a wood-paneled room in Lower Manhattan on a Tuesday morning, letting see something open. He nodded. Yes, the judge looked at Bryce. "Bryce Okafor," she said. "Do you consent?" Bryce stood up. His body made the decision without consulting the part of him that planned things. He looked at Edmund, at the next man in the new navy tie who was holding himself together with both hands and watchings with an expression that had nothing left of surface in it. No armor, no distance, nothing maintained. Just Edmunds, 63 years old, standing at the front of a small courthouse room, having asked for something that mattered more than anything he had asked for in 2 years, waiting for an answer. 2 words. Edmund's face broke. Not collapsed, broke the way things break that have been under sustained pressure for exactly as long as they can hold it, and not 1 moment more. 2 years of sealed rooms and cold coffee and a wallet carried every day because it was the last his son had given him. 2 years of building the surface, back after Damon and maintaining the surface and living behind the surface, because the alternative felt unsurvivable. All of it broke open in that room, in that moment, through those 2 words, and what came through was not grief. What came through was something that had been waiting on the other side of the grief all along. He crossed the room. He pulled Bryce into his arms. Caleb rose from the chair with the notebook still in his inside pocket and stepped forward and put his arms around both of them. And the 3 of them stood there at the front of the room, not performing anything for anyone, not for the judge, or for Sylvia, or for the flag in the corner, or for any version of what this was supposed to look like. Just 3 people who had found each other through the specific and improbable chain of events that begins with a leather wallet in a storm drain on a rainy Tuesday morning in Brooklyn and ends here in this with a gavel. The judge waited. She looked at them with the expression of someone who has witnessed many proceedings and has learned over a long career to recognize the ones that will remain with her after the file is closed. This was one of those. She brought the gavel down. "Bryce and Caleb Hargrove Okafor," she said. "Official family." Sylvia pressed the tissue to her face. She was smiling hard enough that her face hurt, which was not something she had expected to feel in a courthouse on a Tuesday morning and which she would not have traded for anything. 2 years later, on a Thursday evening in November, Edmund made dinner. He had been learning to cook in the way you learn things when you're 65 and have the time and the willingness to be genuinely bad at something for a while before you get better. He was not good yet. He was getting better. The process interested him more than the results, which was something he was finding true about a number of things in his life now. Roasted chicken, because it was the first meal they had shared, and it seemed right to mark 2 years with the same thing that had opened everything. Bryce arrived first, with wine he had chosen entirely based on the label, which he disclosed immediately and without embarrassment. Caleb arrived 11 minutes later with a pie from a bakery in Carroll Gardens and the composition notebook under his arm. "What did you tell them the pie was for?" Bryce said. Caleb set it on the counter. "That we were marking something that happened 2 years ago that we didn't have a single word for." "What did they say?" That it sounded like the kind of thing that deserved good pie. The dinner was not elegant. The chicken was slightly overdone on one side because Edmund had been on the phone with his attorney about the congressional testimony scheduled for January and had lost track of the timer. The potatoes were good. The pie was excellent. They ate and talked about work, about a young woman named Daisy from the Bronx whom Bryce's program had housed 6 weeks ago, who had aged out of foster care with $90 and a bus pass, who was now working at a nonprofit and had sent Bryce a card with 3 sentences in it thanking the program. About the forecasting module Caleb had rebuilt for Gerald that Gerald had described in a written memo to the senior staff as representing a meaningful improvement in operational efficiency, which everyone who knew Gerald understood was the professional equivalent of a standing ovation. About the congressional testimony in January and what Edmund was planning to say. "Say the number," Bryce said. "Say $45 out loud. Make them sit with a specific number." Edmund made a note. Late in the evening, when the plates were cleared and the mine was low, and the city was running its nighttime routines outside the windows of the Brooklyn brownstone, Caleb put the composition notebook on the table. He didn't say anything. He opened it to the first page and left it there. Gloria's handwriting. Blue ink faded at the edges now from being touched so many times. "Take care of each other. That's all I ask." And below it, added 2 years ago in Caleb's own handwriting, on the night of the adoption, in the kitchen, it's the apartment he and Bryce still shared, because neither of them had ever raised the subject of changing this, and neither of them wanted to. "We did, Mom. We're still doing it." Edmund looked at it for a long time. "She would have liked you," Bryce said, quietly. To Edmund, she would have made you uncomfortable at first. She was direct in a way that took some getting used to. Edmund looked up. "I handle direct well." She would have tested that theory. Caleb said, without looking up from the notebook. "She would have invited you to dinner and handed you a dish towel afterward." Edmund looked at him. "I know how to wash dishes," Edmund said. "That's not what the dish towel is for," Caleb said. Edmund sat with that. "No," he said, I suppose it isn't." The brownstone was 4 blocks from the bridge. Edmund had chosen this deliberately, with full knowledge of what 4 blocks meant, and what it felt like to drive past the overpass on the way home in the evening and see the space underneath it. He had chosen it because he believed that proximity to the thing that changed you was how you kept knowing the change was real. The front room had good morning light. On the writing desk near the window sat the wallet in its small glass case that Edmund had built himself, badly, with a woodworking kit on a Tuesday free afternoon, glass sitting slightly crooked in the frame in a way he had never fixed because it looked like something a person had made. On the wall behind the desk in small black letters, "Sometimes the thing you lose leads you to the thing you need most," and below it, printed from a scan of the notebook's first page, "Take care of each other. That's all I ask." Bryce thought about Adaize on the walk home that night. He thought about her the way he thought about all 314 people his program had housed in its first year, with the specific attention someone who understood that care was not a general principle, but a series of particular acts, each one attached to a name and a face and a story that was not interchangeable with any other. Tomorrow he would be in the office early. He would open the database. He would read the new files, and somewhere in Brooklyn or the Bronx or Queens, a person's phone would ring and a real human voice would tell them that the waiting was over, that there was a place, that someone had been paying attention to where they were in the line and had not forgotten that they were in it. 315. He would know the number because he would count it himself, because that was what his mother gave him. Not as a lesson she named, but as a way of being she demonstrated every day until she couldn't anymore. That taking care of someone was not a posture or a program or a line item in a budget. It was a specific act. It had a name. It had a face. It had a story that deserved to be known by someone who would not confuse it with anyone else's. He walked the 4 blocks between Edmund's Dimples brownstone and his own apartment and did not look at the overpass and did not need to. He knew it was there. He knew what it was for. He knew that what it had given him, the thing that sleeping under it for 8 months had given him that nothing else could have, was the inability to look at suffering from a distance and mistake the distance for safety. He couldn't do that anymore. He was no longer capable of it. This was not a loss. Caleb was already home when he at his desk, laptop open, the composition notebook beside it. Not open tonight, just there. present in the way that certain objects were present when they had become part of the structure of a life rather than objects in it. Bryce hung his jacket, made tea, sat on the couch. They didn't talk. The city ran on outside the window. Two brothers in an apartment, 4 blocks from where they used to sleep. 4 blocks from the bridge, and the cardboard, and the tarp, and the framed photograph on the plywood shelf. 4 blocks from the version of their lives that existed before a wallet appeared at the edge of a storm drain on a rainy Tuesday morning, and a hand reached down and picked it up and carried it back. Not a hand that took, a hand that returned. Everything after that was just everything after that.